Hey, good morning. I'm going to start this video off by just kind of sharing like where this came from. I've been, sharing videos on Facebook a little bit here and there, different testimonies and devotionals and things like that from the scripture. I've been thinking about doing this for quite a long time and doing actually more of like a series. And so that's kind of where I'm at. I was thinking through like what to call it. I'm going to do probably 30 days of videos. I don't know if it'll be consecutive days or it might just be 30 videos total over the span of however much time it might be. But there's always been a verse in scripture that has stood out to me. And as I've studied over the years, it's made more sense to me from my earliest interpretation of what that meant. But John the Baptist was the forerunner of Christ. He was the cousin of Jesus. He was sent to prepare the way for the Lord in his first coming to the earth. And John the Baptist made a statement right as he was essentially handing off his ministry so the Lord's ministry could take over. And he made a statement in John 3:30 that says, "He must increase and I must decrease." Now, back in the day, I always looked at that as like, oh, Jesus has to become more and I have to become less. And I think there's some truth in that. But really what John was saying in that was that my ministry is coming to an end. So therefore, my ministry is decreasing. The ministry of Jesus Christ is now increasing and essentially is taking over because he's greater than I. And that was the statement. And so I've really held on to that verse. It's kind of a life verse. But the thought of these videos and the potential, I might do a podcast one day. I don't know. We'll see where this thing goes. But the thought was, if I were to have a podcast name, if I was going to have a devotional name, whatever, it would be increase or decrease to increase. Sorry, backwards. Decrease to increased. And essentially what that means to me is that I can do ministry in my own strength. I can do ministry in my own power. I can do ministry in my own mind and my own might. But what I would want is that I would decrease to the point where the ministry of Jesus Christ is glorified and reflected in the ministry that I do, that Derrick isn't seen, that Jesus is. And so that's really the thought behind this whole thing, is that no matter what these videos entail, is that whatever I think I should do would really be squashed, and that the Lord would give me the ideas, inspire them, bring the anointing, bring the backing to this whole thing. And so as I prayed, I think I've got maybe the first 5 videos and maybe even a couple of the last ones. I don't know about the in-betweens, but the first video, I felt like the Lord was really speaking to me that I should start these videos with my testimony and end these videos with his testimony. What that means fully yet, I don't know. I'm going to keep praying into that. But I at least know I'm supposed to start all of this out with my testimony. I've shared my testimony on Facebook before, but this one's actually going to be broken down into more details, a little more personal stuff. And I really think it can be a benefit and a blessing to people. But anyway, so we'll call this part 1 of my testimony. I think I'm going to split it into like 5 different videos and give you different portions of my life. But this would be the first one. This would be my life. I grew up in a really good home. Like, I had parents that were loving, parents that stayed together. They didn't divorce. They were hard workers. They showed me a lot of good morals, a lot of good values. Growing up though, we didn't go to church. We weren't a church family. There was always some level of belief in God, but I don't think that we fully, as a family, understood what that meant to really believe in the true God. And so growing up, I saw lots of different things, had different family members and things that, partied and whatever. And I don't say that to shame them. So if any of my family's watching this, please do not be offended by that. We had family gatherings, people drank and did things or whatever. It's not that big of a deal, but that's part of my story. I grew up and saw a lot of these things, and they were really normal. They were normalized in my family. And so to me, growing up, I saw those things and just thought, well, that's what you do. Now, I kind of maybe always had that in the back of my head, but, I didn't start experimenting with drugs and stuff until later, but I'll get to that later. But, growing up, for whatever reason, I always had a great fascination with evil things, with dark things, with witchcraft, with sorcery. Anything that had to do with that, my mind was always drawn to that. I think I've always been, a deeply spiritual person, whether I understood it or not. And so I was always drawn to movies and video games and whatever that had to do with a cult and all that stuff. And I think because I had exposure to that and I was intrigued by that, the enemy had a foothold in my life so quickly if I really look back at it. And so I really was fascinated with those things. I was drawn to them. I wanted to know more about them. I studied them. I put my mind into those things. Now, I don't know that I ever actually practiced sorcery or witchcraft. Maybe I did and didn't realize it in ignorance, but I always had this draw to that. And so that was even from a young age. I can remember that. Now you fast forward a little bit, and I was always a heavy set kid. You can call it fat, you can call it overweight, you can call it whatever name you want to give it. I was always a kid who struggled with my weight and controlling my weight and losing weight, and that really affected my self-image. I thought poorly of myself, for so many years. And, and I always wanted to be a kid who fit in. Well, when you're a fat kid, you stand out. You don't fit in. People notice that. People can see it. And so I dealt with that for years. I had developed a very low self-esteem when I became very aware of what people thought about that. And so I went through that stage in life where, years and years and years where I tried to fit in. And then I found, I can be kind of funny. I think you could ask my wife, she might say different, but, most people I think find me humorous. I got a sense of humor like everybody else. And, so my way of fitting in with people and kind of taking the attention off myself at times was to make fun of myself before anybody else could, or just to make jokes, crack jokes, get the attention off, other things, and get the attention off me and get the focus off what I looked like. And so that was kind of my way to cope in some ways. That was part of my escape, was humor. And so I learned how to be the funny kid, the class clown, whatever I could do to bring attention to something other than what I looked like. So I struggled with that, and with that came rejection from girls I liked growing up. And now I can say all this, and I don't really care what people think. I don't say that like in a mean way. I just say like, back then I would never admit that. And now I don't care because I'm okay with that. I'm comfortable with that. It's part of my life. And so, there was rejection that happened through all of that, a lot of stuff that went down. And, that hurt, brought pain. And then, I would just bury through all those moments. And whether that was friends or girlfriends or whatever, there was rejection things there that came up. And, I believed a lie forever that my father didn't receive me or whatever. I don't know why I believed that, because I found out later in life, like, that wasn't true. And I always thought like my older brother had the most favor because he was better at sports or better at X, Y, and Z. And always thought my dad was just kind of like, Derricks, whatever. That was a lie. My dad loved me. My dad, if I tear up in these, that's just what I do. But I know my dad loved me. He did a lot throughout my life that, counteracts everything I could have ever thought about that. So I had this rejection thing, but I also believed that there was, an agenda in the demonic realm against me to get me to believe that I was rejected by everybody, and then I lived my life that way. And so when I got into high school, I started dealing with depression and anxiety and became very aware of what that was. And so through that, I started to kind of be a chameleon in any sort of peer group I could find. I could fit in with nerds. I could fit in with jocks. I just had an ability to kind of fit in with whoever. It didn't matter what group it was. I could find common ground with. And I think that's a gift. I don't think that was like a curse or nothing. I think that was a gift God's given me. But I was putting it to use for my own selfish gain. And so I started to have different peer groups I hung out with, different types of people, whether it was the preps, the jocks, whatever. And but eventually I got connected with the party crowd. And some may watch this video and you know who you are. We did some dirt together, we did some bad things, but I got into this group that accepted me, and it felt like it was just a wholehearted acceptance. Well, with that came my escape from depression and anxiety and rejection and low self-esteem. And that was a bottle, that was a joint, that was cigarettes, that was whatever, cocaine, whatever could get put in front of me drug-wise. I was the type that I got to a point where I despised people that did certain drugs, but then I found myself doing that certain drug. And then later on, I found myself doing another certain drug. And so the train of drug addiction increased very rapidly. I got into this party crowd. I started doing it on the weekends. Then it became maybe every other day in the weekend, then became every day. Then I was skipping school. I got to a point in my junior and senior year where I think I missed 51 days. It was something like that in my senior year of high school. That was due to a lot of things. That was due to me skipping school, to go use drugs, to never show up to school, to go party with my friends. And then it also led into this place of very deep mental health issues. Now, they were mental health, but I also think it was very demonically influenced as well. And I'll get to that, I think, in the second part of the testimony. So stay tuned for the next video. But I'll get more into depths of why I believe it was demonic and it wasn't just a mental health issue. I opened myself up to so many things through the choices I was making, through the drugs I was using, through meth and cocaine. And all of these drugs are just gateways, I believe, for the demonic to enter into your life and really wreak havoc in what you're doing and how you're living. And so I already had my own set of issues. Well, when I entered in all these drug issues and all this drug using and partying and chemicals into my body, there really came a time in my senior year of high school where I was losing my mind. And that's not an exaggeration. I was out of my mind. There was times that I would go into these, what they would deem, the medical community would deem as psychotic episodes. And I look back now and I know that those were, in my opinion, demonic possession. I don't think it was just mental. I think it was demonic possession. Because I would go into these episodes for sometimes weeks at a time and would not know what in the world, what end was up, what I was doing, what I was saying, how I was acting. It was like, almost like the best way I could describe it was like I was in a dream state of living. I didn't recall everything that happened. I might recall bits and pieces, but it was like I had a dream. And then I would snap out of it eventually. Well, they thought maybe it was the meds they were prescribing, whatever. My parents tried everything they could to help me. And at some point, at their wits' end with dealing with this on and off and just the craziness of it, they put me into a psych ward, a psych hospital, because that's what they thought, like that's how you deal with this, because it seemed mental, and I get it. And my parents stuck with me through thick and thin, through some of the hardest times in my life. My parents never left me, man. And so let that be a word of encouragement to any parents going through it with their kids. Don't give up on them. Keep praying. That's just a side note. But back to that, like I was put into psych wards, given medications, psychiatrists, psychologists, counseling, all of this stuff, and nothing, none of that, none of the methods of man ever worked. They just didn't. Now, everybody gets opinionated on these things and they think they know. Well, they got a degree and they got that, and that's fine. If you have a degree and you think and you think it can be treated with meds and whatever, look, that's between you and God, and you got to walk through that. For my personal story, I'm going to testify of what God did in me, and we'll get to that in these next videos. But I was out of my mind. I was in a psych ward. I missed tons of my high school days. I barely graduated high school. A shout out to my old principal, Mr. Stadusky. He worked with me. I graduated scraping through with a 1.835 cumulative GPA. Look at me, I'm smart. And it wasn't because I was dumb by any means. I just didn't do the work. But I graduated high school. And what I say in my testimony is when I graduated high school, I graduated into much harder drugs. I got into cocaine more heavily, crystal meth, LSD, mushrooms, and then I found pain pills. And I had already dabbled with pain pills leading up to getting out of high school, but eventually I found pain pills, and that was what I say, it was the nail in the coffin to my addiction. And I struggled with that from really, really heavily from about the age of 20 to 24. And I had tried different rehab and ended up having a psychotic episode in this rehab in Traverse City. I ended up wandering the streets like a demoniac in Traverse City, Michigan, got locked up for some incident in a bar that I wandered into. I ended up getting a trespassing charge and got thrown into jail, was losing my mind in the jail. Parents got me out of there, and that was a fail. I came back, kind of came to out of this episode, and then began my addiction all over. And so I had tried these little stints. I went to jail, X, Y, and Z, all that stuff. All the stuff that comes with addiction. I did all of those things, and eventually got to a point where my parents thought I might have been doing better, and I was secretly using, and I was stealing money out of their bank account. And I got home one day, and thank you, Mom, for finally just saying, nope, we've had enough of this. She put her foot down. She said, look, we're going to have the bank run the footage, and if you are the one taking this money, you're saying you're not, but if you did, we're going to press charges this time. So you can either go to jail or get help. Well, I went to my boss at the time to go to my second rehab, and I was going to tell him, hey, I got to get help. And so I go to my boss and I tell him, hey, I'm going to go get help again for like 7 to 28 days is what I had set up with the state of Michigan. And God used that man. And he said, brother, like, if you're trying to get real help, you need to go to a place called Teen Challenge. And so he tells me about Teen Challenge. And me, I'm like, just trying to kind of appease him. And I say, yeah, give him, write the number down. And this is back when cell phones were different. It wasn't as easy to get on there like they are now. But I said, write the number down. I'll call when I leave. Had no intention of doing that. I was just lying to his face just to kind of keep my job, hopefully. And he said, well, better yet, I got their name saved in my speed dial. I'm going to get them on the line right now. So I can remember that moment so clear, crystal clear. That was when God stepped into my life in a way that was very understandable to me. I get on the phone with somebody at the Teen Challenge Center. That brother talks to me. He shares his testimony. And I remember specifically, he said, hey, can I pray for you at the end of this call? And so we prayed. And then I remember specifically like getting off that call and going, I don't know that I've had anybody pray with me like that. People probably had been saying prayers for me. I never knew, but I never remember somebody specifically praying with me in the open, like voice, saying words type of prayer. And I knew after that call, there was something deep inside of me that told me I have to go to this program. And it was faith-based. It was a year long. It was in Muskegon, Michigan. It was an hour and a half away from where I lived. And it was this big commitment. I was leaving everything behind. And I was scared to death, but I just knew in my heart that was where I needed to go. And so about 2 weeks later, I get in the car. I was smoking my cigarettes the whole way. I had used that morning. I was doing Oxycontins and popping Vicodins all the way to the center. I didn't care. I was like, well, I'm going to have to detox. Might as well do it there. And I get in this car, and I show up at the door with my family at Teen Challenge. And I'm looking at this building in Muskegon, Michigan, Western Michigan Teen Challenge. Shout out to you guys. Didn't know what I was in for. And all I could see is I'm sitting in the passenger seat of this car, looking at this door. That's the entrance into this whole thing that I have nothing. I don't even know what I'm doing, other than I'm supposed to be here for some reason. And the next video, part 2, we're gonna jump into what happened after I got to Teen Challenge, what took place throughout the program of Teen Challenge, a little bit of what happened as I progressed in Teen Challenge and graduated, and then what came after that. And so stay tuned for part 2. I'm hoping that I can get that tomorrow or the next day. But that's the end of my testimony for part 1. Stay tuned for the next one. We'll see you guys soon.